Okay, so in this video, we've already talked about the poverty head count, and I'm going to just then use this to talk about some others, and then I'll make another video goes through a numerical example similar to the textbook one. So we have our poverty head count index, which we've seen already, and that was in using the notation from the textbook is like this, and therefore where Q is the number where Q is the number of people, of people with the income. We use Y for income less than Z. And then N is just the total population. Okay, and so this will give you a poverty rate, which you're pretty familiar with. It's pretty intuitive. But there's some other dimensions of poverty that we might care about. Okay, so one of the ones with the poverty headcount, it's insensitive to how deep in poverty people are, how far below whatever line you have chosen people are. So there's another thing we could look at, and that is we can look at something we might call the depth. So this is how far below some standard are people. Okay, and so we might call that the depth. So to measure that, just remember Z is your poverty line. My Z's kind of look like twos, so I'm going to put lines on them. So what this means, this fancy econ stuff, notation, this Y is income, and the I just means some person. So this YI is this part right here. It's just the income of person I. And what is person I? Well, if you're not very mathy, person I is just some person. Okay, that's all that means. And so so this right here is the gap. How far, if we only do this only for the people who are below the poverty line, then this shows how far below the poverty line the person is. Okay, so let's suppose our poverty line was the dollar a day one, just to keep it simple. So in a month, the income would be the line would be $30 a month per person. And so if this person has $20 of income, then they are $10 below the line. Okay. So then we can then sum this up. So what we're going to do, we're going to get you familiar with the. So remember we had Q people in poverty. So we can sum this up over each of these Q people. Okay, so what is that? What are we doing here? Well, we're saying, well, how far? This just means we add them all up. So if we have, like, say Q is 5 people, so if we have 5 people below the poverty line, then we say, well, how far below is person 1, and how far below is person 2, and how far below is person 3, and so on, and then we just add them all up. So we add them up for we add up for everybody who has their income below the poverty line. Okay, and what's the interpretation of this? Well, it actually has kind of an interesting interpretation. This number you're going to come up with some value, and this number is the cost of bringing everyone up to the poverty line. This is not forever. This is just mean at some point. Okay, so if the poverty line we're using here is based on a monthly income, for example, then this would tell you how much money do you need in that month, would you have needed to transfer in order to bring everyone up to the poverty line. As we'll see later in this unit, just bringing people up to the poverty line will not necessarily keep them out of poverty if there's some other dynamics going on that tend to push people back into poverty. So anyways, but this is the interpretation of this thing, and the difference between this and the head count is this one will give us an idea of how deep in poverty people are, how far below the line they are. Notice let's suppose our person who before was earning $20 and the poverty line was $30 a month. That person, if we started to give them $5 a month in income, which might make a difference for them in their life, if we started to give them that, it wouldn't change the poverty head count because they would still be below 30, but it would make the depth of poverty less. Okay, so that's one nice thing about this measure is it doesn't just have a rough count. It also it can kind of tell you if progress is being made, even if many people are still below the line, but are they getting closer? So are the incomes rising is kind of what this measure will tell you. Okay, and we can then modify this measure to get one more. And this one is called about severity. Okay, so for severity, we're gonna change this a little bit later. But for severity, we are going to do the same thing as before, but now we're gonna square it. Okay, so we still find the gap for each person who's in poverty, and then we square this. So what does squaring do? Well, squaring puts more weight on those who are far below the poverty line. Okay, so by squaring it, you can that your index is paying more attention to those who are far below the poverty line, and that might be something that you want to do if your emphasis is then on the people who are far below. And then, of course, we could then, if we wanted to sum this up, we could sum it up for all the people who are living in poverty. Remember, we have Q people who are living in poverty. Okay, I can't give you a neat interpretation of this, but later on we'll do a way to convert it to something else. Okay, so these are three different ideas that we have about poverty, and two of them are a little different than what we saw before. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to show something. Let me pause for just a second.